I am Nathan, and I am 32 years old. For 32 years, I was the ghost in my own family. But tonight, sitting at a five-star Manhattan restaurant, I was exactly 3 minutes away from dropping an $18.5 million real estate receipt onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was a single piece of paper that was about to completely obliterate my family's entire understanding of reality and tear down decades of their toxic delusions. While my grandmother Beatrice was simply trying to enjoy her 80th birthday dinner, a milestone she absolutely deserved to celebrate in peace, my parents were busy doing what they always did. They were worshiping my older brother, Sebastian. I sat there in silence, sipping sparkling water, as they literally laughed in my face. I had just politely refused my brother's incredibly patronizing offer to help me out by introducing me to a used car salesman. My own father, a man who had spent his entire life obsessing over appearances, looked at me across a table of 12 people and said, "It is embarrassing for us, Nathan. People ask what our boys are doing, and we have to say Sebastian is taking over Manhattan while you are just floating. No assets, no salary, no ambition. You have to start thinking about your future, son." But there was one massive, undeniable thing they did not know. The ultra-luxury penthouse my brother was currently bragging about trying to rent, the one he called his destiny, I had already bought it. I bought it in cash. And in just a few moments, they were going to find out that their golden child was nothing but a broke, entitled fraud, and the son they threw away like garbage was a multimillionaire who literally owned the roof they were trying to live under. Before I tell you exactly what happened when I dropped that deed on the table and watched my family's world collapse, please hit that like button if you believe that the truth always comes out in the end, no matter how hard people try to hide it. And let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, because I always love seeing how far these stories of survival and justice travel. Now, let's go back to where this spectacular disaster really began. It started exactly how most miserable family gatherings do, at a place we could not really afford to be. We were at the Gilded Lily, one of those aggressively dim, pretentious Manhattan restaurants where the menus do not have prices, the napkins are heavier than most blankets, and the waiters look at you like you are trespassing on private property if you do not order the vintage wine. We were there to celebrate my grandma Beatrice. It was supposed to be her night, a rare moment dedicated entirely to a woman who had spent 8 decades putting up with the absolute circus that was our family. But as always, the gravitational pull of the room had shifted entirely to Sebastian. Sebastian was 34, and he possessed that effortless, annoying kind of handsome that allowed him to fail upward his entire life. He was wearing a bespoke, charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's annual college fund contributions. He was sitting right at the head of the table, gently swirling a glass of red wine that was older than I was, holding court like a king addressing his loyal subjects. Next to him sat Clara, his fiancée. Clara looked perpetually exhausted, her blonde hair perfectly styled, carrying a designer handbag she kept placing prominently on the table so everyone could see the logo. And right across from them sat my parents, Richard and Margaret. They were staring at Sebastian with this glossy-eyed, unwavering adoration that actually made my stomach turn. It was a look they had never, not once, given to me. I was seated at the far end of the table, pushed to the side next to my Aunt Vivian. Vivian was my father's younger sister, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who wore sensible shoes and had a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. We were essentially the exiles of the family, separated from the VIP section by an outrageously large orchid centerpiece that seemed designed specifically to block us out of the conversation. "So," Sebastian boomed, his voice carrying that practiced, theatrical volume he always used to command attention from neighboring tables. "The wedding planner told Clara yesterday that if we want the imported tulips from Holland, the specific ones that match her bridesmaids' dresses, we need to up the floral budget by another 15 grand. Steep. But honestly, you cannot put a price tag on memories. It is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You have to do it right." My father, Richard, nodded solemnly, touching his chin as if Sebastian had just recited a brilliant piece of business philosophy. "Absolutely, son. You and Clara deserve the absolute best. The family name means something in this city. We have standards to maintain. You can't cut corners on a wedding. I took a slow sip of my ice water, trying to wash down the absolute bitterness rising in my throat. We had standards to maintain, right? For Sebastian, maintaining standards meant a blank check for a lavish lifestyle he did not earn. For me, it meant paying for my own community college textbooks and wearing thrift store winter coats. And the housing hunt? My mother, Margaret, chimed in, leaning forward eagerly. She was dripping in heavy gold jewelry that I strongly suspected was either fake or bought on a credit card maxed to its absolute limit. Did you hear back from the monarch yet, sweetheart? I have been telling all my friends at the country club that you are moving there. The entire table went dead quiet. The Monarch was the most exclusive residential tower in the city. It was the kind of building where billionaire hedge fund managers and international diplomats lived, where the doormen were paid a six-figure salary just to keep the commoners out, and where the penthouse views of Central Park cost a human soul. Sebastian cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie nervously. He suddenly looked a little flushed, losing a fraction of his swagger. Well, we are still in intense negotiations. The condo board there is incredibly stiff. They have these archaic, ridiculous rules about liquidity and asset verification. They want to see years of tax returns. But I am confident. Once I sit down with them and they see the vision for my new consulting firm, they will realize exactly who they are dealing with. I saw Aunt Vivian roll her eyes so hard I genuinely thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. She leaned over to me, her voice a sharp whisper. Consulting firm? Is that what we are calling being unemployed with a nice business card these days? The boy hasn't held down a real job in 5 years. I stifled a laugh, biting the inside of my cheek to keep my face perfectly neutral. But Sebastian had a radar for anyone not paying him absolute homage. His eyes snapped toward our end of the table, narrowing with irritation. Something funny, Nathan? Nothing, I said calmly, meeting his gaze. Just admiring the orchids. They are very impressive. Sebastian sneered, taking a slow sip of his wine. I am surprised you could even make it tonight, Nathan. I know the subway ride from Queens, or wherever it is you live now, can be incredibly unreliable on weekends. I would hate for you to be stranded. Brooklyn? I corrected him, my voice completely flat. And the train was fine. It runs on schedule. Right? Brooklyn? Sebastian chuckled, looking around the table to ensure everyone was in on the joke. He shook his head in mock pity. I don't know how you do it, man. The noise, the smell, the tiny spaces. I need space to think, to create. I need an environment that matches my ambition. That is why the Monarch is the only option for us. The penthouse unit specifically. It is not just real estate, Nathan. It is a statement. It is certainly a statement, I replied, my tone deadpan. You wouldn't understand, Nathan? My mother interjected, her voice dripping with that sweet, poisonous condescension she had perfected over decades of practice. Sebastian is building a legacy. Appearances matter in his world. He is dealing with high-level executives. We cannot all be happy living in modest, stagnant conditions. Some people are just wired for more. Modest, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. It is fine, Mom. Sebastian waved a hand dismissively, playing the benevolent older brother. Nathan has his little computer projects. We have real-world business. Oh, by the way, Nathan, did you park that rental car out front? The gray sedan? I think I saw a massive dent in the bumper when we walked in. You might want to check the insurance policy on that. Wouldn't want you to get hit with a massive lawsuit over a fender bender. You don't exactly have the savings to fight a legal battle. My father let out a deep, hearty belly laugh, slapping the table. Good one, son. Practical advice. Always check the liability clauses, Nathan. I looked down at my pristine white plate. My right hand was resting on the outside of my suit jacket pocket. Beneath the expensive fabric, I could feel the outline of the thick, folded document inside. The paper was crisp. The ink on the signatures was dry. It was the absolute, unencumbered deed to Penthouse A at the Monarch. I glanced over at Grandma Beatrice. She was sitting quietly, watching the entire exchange. She looked frail, but her sharp blue eyes were missing absolutely nothing. She caught my gaze and gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. Not yet, her eyes said. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. Let them hang themselves with their own words. I took a deep breath, smiled politely at my brother and said, I will definitely keep that in mind, Sebastian. Thanks for looking out for me. Anytime, little brother. Sebastian smirked, raising his glass high. To success. Real success. To success. My parents and Clara echoed, clinking their heavy crystal glasses together in a sickening display of unity. I raised my water glass in silence. To the truth, I thought to myself, and to the absolute inferno that is about to burn this entire illusion to the ground. I thought the worst part of my life was just being the forgotten son, the one who was left in the shadows. But as I sat there, listening to them mock me, I realized I was incredibly wrong. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was the active, malicious joy they took in trying to keep me beneath them. To truly understand why I was completely prepared to publicly execute my own brother's ego at a fancy restaurant, and why I felt absolutely no guilt about destroying my parents' carefully curated public image, you have to understand the deeply toxic soil this family dynamic grew in. It was not just one bad dinner. It was 32 years of being the spare tire to Sebastian's luxury vehicle. The difference in how my parents treated us was not a subtle preference. It was structurally built into the very foundation of our daily lives. I vividly remember the summer I turned 14. It was a scorching, suffocating July in suburban Connecticut. The air was thick with humidity, smelling of hot asphalt and fresh-cut grass. Sebastian, who was 16 at the time, had suddenly decided after watching a movie that he wanted to be a global leader. In his mind, and consequently in my parents' minds, this meant he absolutely had to attend the International Future Leaders Summit in Switzerland. The cost was $5,000 for exactly 2 weeks. I sat at our kitchen table one morning, eating a bowl of dry, generic brand cereal, watching my father write the check. He signed it with a massive, arrogant flourish, tearing it out of the checkbook like he was signing a historic peace treaty that would save the world. This is an investment, my dad had said, handing the check to my mom to put in the mail. Sebastian has executive potential. You can see it in the way he walks into a room. He has presence. He needs to rub shoulders with the elite early on so he understands his peer group. I waited until the check was sealed in the envelope before I finally spoke up. My heart was pounding. I had a folded, crumpled community college brochure in my sweaty hand. Dad, I asked quietly, sliding the paper across the table. What is it, Nathan? He did not even look up from his ledger, still admiring the balance in his account. There is a coding camp at the community college starting next week. It is a day camp, so there are no travel costs, no hotels, no airfare. It is only $300 for the whole month. I really want to learn C++. I think I could be really good at it. My dad stopped writing. He slowly took off his reading glasses, letting them hang on the chain around his neck, and looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and absolute annoyance. Nathan, we just spent a significant amount of our liquidity on Sebastian's trip. We need to be practical with the rest of our budget. But it is only $300, I argued, my voice cracking with teenage desperation. We spend more than that on Sebastian's private tennis lessons every single month. And he doesn't even like tennis. That is completely different. My mom interjected sharply from the sink, not even turning around to face me. Tennis is a social skill, honey. It opens doors at the country club. It helps you network. Sitting in a dark room typing on a computer like a hermit, that is not going to help you in the real world. That kind of behavior is borderline antisocial. Besides, your brother needs a new wardrobe for Switzerland. You cannot send a future CEO out in rags. He represents this family. They never sent me to the camp. Instead, Sebastian got 3 bespoke suits, expensive Italian leather shoes, and a designer luggage set for a 2-week teenage retreat where, as he later bragged to his friends, the kids mostly drank smuggled liquor and hooked up in expensive chalets. When he came back, he had a tan and a completely meaningless, printed certificate of global vision that my parents framed in gold and hung in the living room. I spent that entire summer mowing lawns in our neighborhood. I woke up at 6 a.m. every day. I saved up every single dollar, sweating in the brutal humidity, pushing a heavy, rusted mower until my hands were covered in thick, painful blisters that popped and bled. With the money I earned, I walked to a garage sale 3 streets down and bought an old, bulky desktop computer from a neighbor whose son had gone off to college. It was a dinosaur, yellowed with age and heavy as a boulder, but it turned on. I bought it for $50. I set it up in the darkest corner of our unfinished basement, the only place I was allowed to keep my junk without ruining my mother's aesthetic. While Sebastian was upstairs in the air conditioning, modeling his imported Swiss clothes for my parents and receiving standing ovations for simply existing, I was downstairs in the damp, musty dark, bathed in the blue glow of a cheap CRT monitor. I bought a used, outdated coding textbook from a library discard sale for $2. While my brother learned how to manipulate people with fake charm, I learned how to build complex, logical systems. Machines did not care about your designer shoes, your parents' bank account, or your country club membership. They only cared if your code was clean, efficient, and true. The isolation of my teenage years would have completely destroyed me if it was not for Grandma Beatrice. While my father was obsessed with status and brand names, Beatrice was obsessed with character and substance. One evening, after another exhausting family dinner where my parents celebrated Sebastian for getting a C+ on a history paper by ordering a massive cake, I slipped away to Grandma's study. It was my only sanctuary. It smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and dried lavender. She found me sitting on the Persian rug, reading one of her thick, heavy encyclopedias. "Not enjoying the coronation out there?" she asked, her voice raspy but incredibly warm. She closed the heavy oak door behind her, shutting out the sound of my parents' laughter. "It is just a history paper, Grandma," I muttered, staring at the pages without reading them. "He barely passed, but they act like he won a Nobel Prize." "I know, sweet boy," she said, walking over to her massive desk. "The world loves to celebrate loud noises, Nathan. People are easily distracted by shiny things. But silence. Silence is where the real work happens." She unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a heavy wooden box. The velvet lining was worn, faded by decades of time. "Come here," she instructed softly. I walked over. Inside the box were rows of silver coins. They were not shiny or polished. In fact, they were dull, some almost completely black with thick tarnish. "These," she said, picking one up delicately between her fingers, "are Mercury dimes, and these larger ones are Morgan dollars. My father collected them during the Great Depression. They do not look like much, do they?" "They look dirty," I admitted honestly. She smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile. "That is tarnish, Nathan. It happens when real silver sits in the dark for a long time. It oxidizes, but underneath that ugly black layer, it is solid, pure silver. Real, undeniable value. Your father, he likes things that sparkle. Chrome, glass, new paint on a fancy car. But chrome rusts and paint chips away. This," she pressed a heavy, cold coin into my palm and folded my fingers over it. "This holds its weight no matter what happens to the world." She looked me dead in the eye, her expression fiercely serious. "I want you to have this collection, Nathan. All of it." My eyes widened in shock. "But shouldn't Sebastian get it? He is the oldest. It's his inheritance. Mom says everything important goes to the firstborn." Grandma Beatrice let out a dry, sharp laugh. "Sebastian would sell these tomorrow to buy a flashy watch that stops ticking in a year. Or worse, he would polish them with harsh chemicals to make them shiny and completely destroy their numismatic value. You appreciate things as they are. You understand that value is not always visible to the naked eye." She gripped my shoulder tightly. "Listen to me. Some treasures grow quietly in the dark. Let them overlook you. Let them think you are nothing. When they do not see you coming, they cannot stop you." That box of coins became my very first secret. I took them down to my basement, I went to the library, looked up their values, and learned everything about grading, mint marks, and the fluctuations of the global silver market. By the time I was 15, I was selling duplicate coins online, reinvesting the profits into underpriced collectibles, and flipping them for larger margins. I had thousands of dollars hidden in a digital account, more money than my brother had in his entire life, but I still wore faded shirts from Walmart. I was playing a long, quiet game, and my family did not even know the rules. High school ended, and the divide between my brother and me widened into a canyon. Sebastian went to an outrageously expensive private liberal arts college, funded entirely by my dad draining his retirement accounts and taking out loans. I went to the state university on a partial scholarship because it had one of the most rigorous computer science programs in the country. College for me was a brutal, relentless grind. While Sebastian posted photos of frat parties and ski trips, I worked 3 jobs. I fixed broken laptops for students, did freelance coding late at night, and ate so much instant ramen that my sweat actually smelled like sodium. But in my junior year, everything culminated. I entered a massive state fintech innovation challenge. I spent 6 months building an algorithm designed to predict microtrends in highly volatile markets. I didn't sleep. I coded until my eyes bled. And I won. First place. I was handed a heavy glass trophy and a massive novelty check for $5,000. I had called my parents weeks in advance, begging them to come to the award ceremony. "It is a big deal, Dad. The governor will be there. Industry leaders will be there. Please come." "We will try, Nathan, but no promises," he had said distractedly. The night of the ceremony, I stood on the brightly lit stage holding my trophy. I scanned the massive, crowded auditorium. I looked for my mother's blonde hair. I looked for my father's familiar suit. I searched every single row. Nothing. My family was not there. I stood entirely alone. I found out the next morning why they didn't show up. Sebastian had been arrested that exact night. He had taken his brand new Porsche, an absurdly expensive early graduation gift from my parents, and crashed it straight into a parked car while heavily intoxicated. My parents spent the entire night at the police station with a high-priced lawyer, paying exorbitant bail and pulling every string they had to keep his mugshot out of the local papers. They blew tens of thousands of dollars to protect a criminal and could not send a single text message to congratulate me on the biggest achievement of my life. I walked out of that auditorium, put my heavy trophy in the trunk of my beat-up car, and sat in the driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. The sadness was completely gone. I was just cold, ice cold. As I sat there in the dark parking lot, a man knocked on my car window. He was older, wearing a modest, well-tailored suit with sharp, calculating eyes. "Nathan? I am Victor. Victor Sterling." He was a legend in the investment world, a self-made billionaire who notoriously drove a 10-year-old car and hated the media. He had seen my presentation. He saw the algorithm. "I noticed you didn't have anyone taking pictures of you tonight," Victor said smoothly, leaning against my car. "They had a conflict," I replied defensively, looking away. "Their loss," he said without an ounce of pity. "Let's go get coffee and talk about your code. I think you are sitting on a gold mine, kid." That night, in a greasy 24-hour diner, my life changed forever. Victor did not offer me sympathy. He offered me a job as a junior analyst, access to his Bloomberg terminals, and raw, unfiltered respect. I thought I finally had my escape route. I thought the pain of my family's rejection was behind me. I was so incredibly wrong about how hard they would try to drag me back down into the dirt. Under Victor's strict but brilliant mentorship, I thrived in absolute silence. I soaked up every piece of financial knowledge he threw at me. I graduated university with top honors. Another ceremony my parents conveniently missed because Sebastian was dealing with a severe emotional crisis. After a girl he dated for a month broke up with him. I went to work full-time at Victor's firm, but deep down, I knew I wanted to build my own empire. I pitched Victor my grand idea for Aegis Analytics. It was an AI-driven platform designed to democratize hedge fund-level data for mid-tier investors. Victor did not try to keep me chained to his desk as an employee. Instead, he smiled, pulled out his checkbook, and handed me a check for $50,000 of his own personal money as seed capital. I want 10% equity, and I want you to build a fortress, Victor told me, shaking my hand. And never let anyone inside the walls who hasn't bled for it. I took the money and rented a miserable, damp basement apartment in a sketchy part of Brooklyn. It smelled permanently of wet concrete and old pipes. I hired one brilliant, ruthless coder named Maya, whom I poached from a major tech firm by offering her massive equity, and we worked like absolute maniacs. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a desk made of 2 sawhorses and an old door I found in an alley. Every single cent of revenue we made went straight back into the servers and data licenses. Meanwhile, Sebastian was failing upward in spectacular, infuriating fashion. After he barely graduated, my father immediately hired him at his construction supply company, inventing the ridiculous title Director of Strategic Innovation. They rented him a massive, glass-walled office in Midtown Manhattan, paying an $8,000 monthly lease. I visited him once. Sebastian spent his days playing FIFA on a massive flat-screen TV and drinking expensive scotch from a crystal decanter. When my parents finally came to visit my Brooklyn basement a few months later, my mother literally held a lavender-scented handkerchief to her nose the entire time. "Nathan, this is squalid. It's depressing," she said, looking in horror at the water stains on my ceiling. "You are living like a rat in the sewers. Why don't you just swallow your pride and ask Sebastian for a job? He could use an assistant to fetch coffee or organize his files. He would take care of you." I looked at her, my jaw tight, my hands clenched into fists. "I am building a company, Mom. I am investing in myself. My code is solid." "You are investing in a fantasy," my dad snapped, walking over and kicking the corner of my bare mattress with his expensive leather shoe. "You need to learn how the real world works. You have no salary, no 401k, no benefits. You are a ghost, Nathan. It's pathetic." The real world hit me hard exactly 6 months later, and it almost destroyed everything I had built. Aegis Analytics was growing rapidly, but we hit a massive, unexpected wall. Our primary critical data provider changed their API pricing model completely overnight. They demanded an upfront, non-negotiable fee of $50,000 within 48 hours, or they would cut our access. If our servers went dark, our clients would leave instantly. The company would die. We would be sued for breach of contract. I had exactly $12,000 left in my business account. I was waiting on massive client invoices to clear, but the banks were slow, and the money was at least a week away. It was a brutal, terrifying cash flow crunch. I tried to reach Victor, but he was completely unreachable, on a mandatory silent retreat in a remote part of Indonesia. I was backed into a corner. The walls were closing in. I had absolutely no choice. I swallowed every ounce of my pride, picked up my phone and called my father. "Dad, I need a bridge loan," I said, skipping all the pleasantries. My voice was shaking. "I need $50,000. I can pay you back in exactly 10 days with full interest. I have the signed client invoices to prove the money is coming. I just need a bridge to survive the week." My father sighed heavily into the receiver. It was that slow, dramatic sigh he used when he was about to deliver a lecture. "50,000? Nathan, that is an absurd amount of money to ask for on a whim. Dad, it is life or death for my business. If I don't pay this vendor by tomorrow afternoon, I lose 3 years of my life. Maya loses her job. Everything goes to zero." "I don't know, son," he said, using that fake, condescending financial tone he loved so much. "The market is soft right now. Liquidity is very tight for the family. The supply company is practically facing bankruptcy. We are scraping by. And honestly, I am not going to throw good money after bad. If your little software project is so fragile that one unexpected bill kills it, then it is simply not a viable business. I do not have the cash lying around. You will just have to figure it out. That is how you learn the hard way." Click. He hung up on me. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my basement, staring at my phone, feeling like my lungs had violently collapsed. Tight liquidity, bankruptcy, scraping by. I actually felt guilty for asking. I truly believed him. I thought my family was suffering, and I had been selfish to ask. Until the next morning. I woke up after zero sleep, my eyes burning. I opened my phone to check my emails, and the very first thing that popped up on my social media feed was a post from my mother. It was a high-resolution photo of Sebastian standing in our childhood driveway. Next to him, gleaming in the morning sun, was a brand-new, cherry-red Lamborghini. It had a massive, absurd silver bow stuck to the hood. The caption read, "Surprise for our hard-working executive. Sebastian has been under so much pressure at the office lately. We decided to relieve some stress. The down payment was hefty, but seeing his beautiful smile is priceless. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family first, hashtag hard work pays off." I stared at the screen. My vision actually blurred. The air left the room. I worked in finance. I did the math instantly. A lease down payment on that specific Lamborghini model with taxes and fees was exactly $60,000. Cash. Affront. My father did not have $50,000 to save his youngest son's life work. A loan that was contractually guaranteed to be repaid in 10 days. But he magically found $60,000 in liquid cash to buy a supercar toy for a 34-year-old man who played video games in an empty office all day. Something inside my chest violently snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, absolute freezing of my soul. The very last tether of loyalty, duty, and love I had to those people evaporated into thin air. They were dead to me. I had 24 hours left before Aegis was deleted from existence. I had $12,000 to my name. I did something reckless. Something that would make lawyers, regulators, and financial advisors scream in horror. I took my entire $12,000, logged into a high-risk options trading account, and looked at a volatile biotech stock my algorithm had been tracking for weeks. The data indicated a massive, hidden accumulation pattern by institutional buyers. The math said there was a 99% probability of a breakout. You will just have to figure it out. That is how you learn. My dad's voice echoed maliciously in my head. Watch me learn. I whispered to the empty basement. I pushed the button. I bought out-of-the-money call options. I bet every single cent, leveraged to the absolute maximum limit. If I was wrong, I would be homeless by Friday. I sat there in the dark, watching the ticker blink. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, the biotech company announced full FDA approval for a revolutionary blockbuster drug. The news hit the wire, and the stock did not just go up. It went vertical. It violently gapped up. My leveraged position exploded in value. By 10 a.m., my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, I hit the sell button. I watched the screen refresh. The available cash balance in my account settled at exactly $492,000. I wired the vendor $50,000 instantly. Aegis was safe. I stared at the remaining $442,000. I didn't call my parents to brag. I didn't post a picture online, because I realized in that basement that their tight liquidity was a massive, disgusting lie. The only thing they lacked was love for me. I took that money and poured gasoline on my company. I hired 5 more developers. I aggressively expanded our marketing. And I made a silent vow. I would never, ever need them again. But they were going to need me. I just had to wait patiently in the dark for the storm to hit them. Over the next few years, Aegis Analytics did not just grow. It dominated the market. Within 18 months, we were generating over $2 million in monthly recurring revenue. We became the gold standard for mid-tier institutional data. A major, prestigious banking institution offered to buy us out for $45 million. I looked at the offer, laughed in their boardroom, and walked out. Instead, I used our massive valuation to secure a line of credit and aggressively acquired the very data competitor that had tried to extort me for the $50,000. I bought their entire company, walked into their headquarters, fired the manager who had threatened me, and seamlessly integrated their tech into Aegis. By the time I turned 30, my personal net worth crossed the $50 million mark. I was a ghost in the financial world, The media called me the invisible billionaire in the making, but I strictly forbade my PR team from releasing my photo. I moved out of the basement into a high-security, ultra-luxury building in Brooklyn. It had a private elevator, a doorman, and a gym, but the exterior was totally unassuming. I still drove an older, reliable Volvo. Whenever I was forced to visit my family for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I purposely wore faded jeans, scuffed shoes, and generic shirts. I let my dad dramatically complain about the bill at diner lunches. I let my mother lecture me about getting a real salary with benefits and a 401k match. I played the role of the struggling tech guy flawlessly. "How is the little computer project going?" Sebastian would ask, swirling expensive scotch that my dad paid for, leaning against the kitchen counter. "It keeps the lights on," I would say mildly, drinking tap water. "Well, keep grinding. Maybe one day you'll get a promotion to a real office," he would chuckle. I kept my mouth shut because I knew the terrifying, absolute truth. If they knew I had $50 million in liquid assets, they would drain me completely dry. Not out of malice, but out of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Sebastian would instantly demand venture capital for fake businesses he wanted to start. My dad would demand a massive cash bailout for his failing construction company. My mom would demand luxury real estate in the Hamptons. They deeply believed that what belonged to one family member belonged to all, which really meant it belonged to Sebastian to spend. So, I watched them slowly drown in their own vanity. My dad's business was actually collapsing. I ran background checks. The housing market shifted, margins shrank, but they refused to adjust their lavish lifestyle. My mom started buying knockoff designer bags online but carefully hiding the shipping boxes. They were bleeding money from every pore to keep up the facade of Sebastian's executive success. I was perfectly content to let them crash and burn on their own terms. It wasn't my problem. Until Grandma Beatrice got sick. 3 weeks before her highly anticipated 80th birthday dinner, her heart started failing. I got the frantic call from my Aunt Vivian in the middle of a critical board meeting. I immediately canceled a multi-million-dollar acquisition call, walked out of the room, got in my car, and drove straight to the hospital in Connecticut. When I walked into the ICU waiting room, my parents were sitting there looking deeply annoyed, not devastated. "She is just being stubborn and dramatic," my dad grumbled, aggressively checking his Rolex. "The doctors say it's her heart, but she just wants attention. Where is Sebastian?" I demanded, looking around the empty waiting room. He had a very critical fitting for his custom wedding tuxedo in the city. My mom defended him fiercely, crossing her arms. "He cannot just drop his life, Nathan." Clara was very stressed about the tailoring. I ignored them, disgusted, and walked into the sterile ICU room. Grandma Beatrice looked incredibly small. Her silver hair spread thin across the pillow, hooked up to a dozen beeping monitors. I pulled up a chair, held her frail, paper-thin hand, and I stayed there. I did not leave for 3 days. I ran my corporate empire from a glowing laptop in the dark corner of her hospital room, while my family popped in for 10-minute increments before rushing back to their busy lives. Sebastian finally showed up on the afternoon of the second day. He walked in wearing a designer tracksuit, smelling heavily of cologne. He leaned over the bed, pulled his phone out, and took a selfie of himself holding her hand, making sure his expensive watch was in the frame. I literally watched him type #FamilyFirst #PrayersForGrandma on his screen before hitting post. "Got to run," he whispered to me exactly 5 minutes later. "Meeting the florist for the wedding. You can stay, right? It's not like you have a demanding job or a salary to get back to." After he walked out, Grandma Beatrice slowly opened her eyes and pulled her plastic oxygen mask down. "Did he get the lighting right for his little photo?" she rasped, her voice weak but full of sharp irony. I chuckled bitterly, squeezing her hand. "I think he used a filter to make himself look tanner." She turned her head, her blue eyes piercing right through my disguise. "Stop it, Nathan." "Stop what?" I asked softly. "Stop pretending to be small. It does not suit you anymore." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. "Grandma, I don't know what you—" "The Wall Street Journal," she interrupted. her voice shockingly steady for someone in heart failure. 6 months ago, the invisible tech giant. How Aegis Analytics is rewriting the rules. There was no photo of the CEO, but they named him Nathan. She reached a shaking, bruised hand under her hospital pillow and pulled out a heavily folded, crumpled clipping of the newspaper article. I read it every single day, Nathan. I knew it. I always knew it. You did it. You really did it. Hot tears flooded my eyes. I gripped her hand, pressing it to my forehead. Why didn't you tell them? Because you were not ready, she whispered, stroking my hair. And I respect a secret. You were protecting your peace. But look at me, Nathan. I am dying. My heart is giving out. And I am not going to leave this earth knowing my brilliant grandson is hiding in the shadows because he is afraid of outshining a cheap flashlight. I just don't want them coming for the money, I admitted, my voice breaking. They will destroy everything I built. They are already coming for blood, she said, her tone suddenly turning dark and urgent. You bought that penthouse, didn't you? The one Sebastian won't shut up about. My jaw literally dropped. I stared at her in shock. How do you know that? My bridge partner's son is the head broker at Douglas Elliman, she smiled faintly. He mentioned a cash buyer named Nathan scooping up the exact unit my idiot grandson was rejected from due to terrible credit and zero income verification. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Listen to me carefully. I know what Richard did. I know what your father did. What did Dad do? I asked, a cold dread washing over me. They are broke, Nathan, she said, a tear escaping her eye and rolling down her wrinkled cheek. Your father's business is completely insolvent. To pay for Sebastian's lavish wedding, and to try and show enough assets to bribe the condo board for his lease, your parents secretly forged documents and took out a massive second mortgage on my house. The house my husband built with his own 2 hands. The blood drained from my face. My parents had risked Grandma Beatrice's shelter, her absolute security, her home of 50 years, just to buy Sebastian imported tulips and a fancy party to impress people they didn't even like. It was the ultimate betrayal. My 80th birthday dinner is next week, Grandma Beatrice whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto mine. I am going to be there. I don't care what the doctors say. And you are going to promise me something. Anything? I said, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. No more hiding. Burn this house of lies down to the ground, Nathan. Burn it all down. Let the truth stand in the ashes. I looked at the woman who gave me those silver coins. I looked at the only person who ever loved me for who I was, not what I could buy them. I promise, I said, and that is exactly how I ended up sitting at the Gilded Lily, with an $18.5 million deed burning a hole in my jacket pocket, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike a match and watch their fake world burn. We are back at the Gilded Lily. The appetizers had been cleared by waiters who moved silently like ghosts through the dim, amber-lit room, and the main courses had just arrived under heavy silver cloches. The air in the private dining room was thick, suffocatingly heavy with the smell of roasted truffles, expensive red wine, and the absolute toxicity of my family's unchecked egos. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, nursing a glass of ice water. The condensation dripped onto the white linen tablecloth. I was perfectly still, watching the performance unfold. Sebastian was still holding court, aggressively cutting into his filet mignon while continuing his endless, self-important monologue about the Monarch penthouse. It was his white whale, his ultimate obsession, and he simply could not let it go. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his 34 years of life. The thing is, Sebastian said, pointing his heavy silver fork directly at our father, the Monarch desperately needs young blood. I told the condo board directly during our preliminary meeting. I looked those old money executives in the eye and I said they have a building completely full of aging dinosaurs. They need influencers. They need vitality, a modern aesthetic, and someone who understands the current market. I truly think they heard my vision. They just need to verify my real estate portfolio and my liquid assets. I am completely sure they did, sweetheart. My mother, Margaret said. She aggressively glared at a passing waiter who was half a second too slow in refilling her imported sparkling water. They would be incredibly lucky to have you and Clara in that building. You bring a certain level of class that you simply cannot buy. It is bred into you. The Hale family name carries weight, and you are the perfect person to uphold that legacy. They should be begging you to sign that lease. Aunt Vivian, sitting right next to me in the exile zone of the table, discreetly checked her phone under the table. I nudged her sensible shoe with my foot. She gave me a tiny, razor-sharp smirk. She knew exactly what was coming. I had briefed her and Grandma Beatrice extensively beforehand because I needed my true allies completely prepared for the blast radius of the bomb I was about to drop. Grandma Beatrice was sitting quietly at the very head of the table. She looked physically frail, her breathing a little shallow, but her piercing blue eyes were dancing with absolute fire. She was watching the grand illusion play out, waiting patiently for the fireworks to start. So, Nathan, my dad turned his attention to me. His face slightly red and bloated from the copious amounts of vintage wine he had already consumed. Sebastian mentioned earlier that you are still driving that dented rental car. Or did you finally manage to scrape together enough for a used one? Because honestly, you need a reliable vehicle if you ever want to be taken seriously by anyone in the corporate world. You cannot pull up to a client meeting in a junker. It reflects poorly on your salary potential. It is a rental, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of emotion. I have not decided on a permanent vehicle yet. You know, Sebastian interjected, talking loudly with his mouth entirely full of expensive steak, I could probably get you a massive deal at the local dealership. My guy there owes me a huge favor after I leased the Lamborghini. I could maybe get you into a certified pre-owned sedan. Nothing flashy, obviously, because you don't have the salary to maintain it, but it is a solid entry-level car. It might help you with whatever it is you actually do all day in that basement. I do not think I need your help with a car, Sebastian, I said calmly, looking directly at his smug face. Suit yourself, he shrugged dismissively, taking a massive gulp of wine and wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. I am just trying to help you level up in life. You know, Mom and Dad worry about you constantly. You are 32 years old, and you are essentially stagnant. It is honestly sad to watch you waste your potential. Stagnant? I asked, leaning back slowly in my heavy wooden chair. Yeah, Nathan, stagnant. You have no real estate investments, no serious career trajectory, no wife, no inheritance prospects because you refuse to join the family business and learn from Dad. You are just floating blindly through life. It is embarrassing for them, honestly. People at the country club ask what the Hale boys are doing, and they proudly tell them Sebastian is taking over Manhattan real estate, and then they have to look down at their shoes and mumble that Nathan is just figuring things out. My mother nodded sadly, playing the role of the deeply concerned, long-suffering matriarch to absolute perfection. It is entirely true, Nathan. We just want you to have a fraction of what Sebastian has built for himself. We want you to have ambition. We want you to stop being so small and invisible. We invested heavily in your college fund, and it breaks our hearts to see you doing nothing with your degree. You need to start taking life seriously before it passes you by completely. I reached forward and slowly placed my fork down on the pristine porcelain plate. The sharp clink of the metal against the fine china echoed loudly in the private room. The sound was so definitive, so completely out of place in their symphony of self-congratulation, that it actually silenced the entire table. Ambition? I repeated the word slowly, tasting the absolute hypocrisy of it. I looked directly into my father's bloodshot eyes. Is that what we are calling it now? Is secretly mortgaging Grandma Beatrice's house behind her back to pay for a wedding reception considered ambition? The color instantly drained from my father's face. He looked like he had been physically struck by a heavy object. His jaw dropped slightly. What did you just say? I know all about the secret second mortgage, Dad, I said, my voice remaining completely steady, cold, and relentlessly factual. I know the construction supply business is completely insolvent. I know you are drowning in a massive ocean of debt, fielding calls from collection agencies, just to fund Sebastian's fake lifestyle. That is private family business, my father roared, slamming his heavy hand down on the table so hard the crystal wine glasses rattled and threatened to tip over. You have no right to speak about things you do not comprehend. I am family, I shot back, my voice cutting through his manufactured anger like a surgical scalpel. And Grandma Beatrice lives in that house. You are gambling with her shelter, her absolute physical security, just so Sebastian can have imported tulips at his wedding and pretend he is a real estate mogul. You are actively risking leaving your own mother homeless to protect an illusion. You do not know what you are talking about, you idiot, Sebastian sneered, though his voice wavered noticeably. Dad is just leveraging our assets. It is high-level finance. It is an aggressive corporate strategy. You wouldn't understand it because you don't understand how money actually works in the upper echelons. You have never handled real capital. High-level finance? I let out a sharp, cold laugh that made my mother flinch. Is that what you call getting aggressively rejected by the Monarch Condo Board because your credit score is in the gutter and you cannot provide a single legitimate pay stub? Sebastian stood up immediately. His heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, making a horrible screeching sound. Shut your mouth, Nathan. You are just jealous. You have always been insanely jealous of me and my success. I am getting that penthouse. They are just reviewing the final paperwork. They are not reviewing anything, Sebastian, I said, standing up slowly to meet his furious gaze, ensuring I was looking down at him. The unit is completely off the market. You are a liar, Sebastian shouted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple with rage. My broker called me yesterday and said the unit is still pending. It was pending, I said, reaching a slow, deliberate hand into my tailored suit jacket pocket. Until this morning, I pulled out the thick, legally binding document. I did not throw it in anger. I placed it deliberately onto the center of the table, right on top of the extravagant, ridiculously expensive orchid centerpiece. It is sold, I said softly, the words carrying the weight of an absolute death sentence for his ego. Sebastian snatched the thick stack of paper off the table with trembling hands. He flipped to the front page, his eyes frantically scanning the dense legal jargon. I watched in deep satisfaction as his eyes bulged out of his head. He looked at the document, then looked up at me, then back at the document in sheer, unadulterated terror. Nathan Hale, he whispered, his voice completely devoid of air, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. This deed says you bought it. Cash? I added, my voice echoing cleanly in the dead silence of the room. $18.5 million. Paid in full. The title is clear, and the keys are in my pocket. The silence that followed was absolute. It felt like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. My father dropped his heavy silver fork. It hit his plate with a harsh, metallic clang that made my mother physically jump in her seat. 18 million? My dad stammered, staring at me as if I were a complete stranger who had just broken into his home. Nathan? How did you steal this money? Is this some kind of illegal fraud? Are you facing a massive lawsuit? You are going to drag the family name through the mud. You are going to ruin us all with a federal investigation. It is incredibly funny to me, I said, leaning forward and resting my knuckles firmly on the table. You instantly assume I am a criminal before you ever assume I am successful. No, Dad, I did not steal a single cent. I earned it through relentless, exhausting work. Do you remember that little computer project I was working on in the basement? The one you mocked and told me to abandon? It is a company called Aegis Analytics, and it is currently valued at nearly $250 million. That is literally impossible, my mother whispered, her hands frantically clutching her fake pearl necklace, her face pale with shock. You live in a disgusting, damp basement in Brooklyn. You wear cheap clothes. You drive a rental car. You cannot possibly be a billionaire. I lived in a basement so I could build a bulletproof future, I said, my gaze locking onto hers with zero sympathy. While you were buying Sebastian luxury boats and leasing Lamborghinis to fix his non-existent stress, I was building actual equity. While you were faking your wealth and sinking into debt, I was accumulating it quietly in the dark. I didn't need shiny things to prove my worth. I needed security. Sebastian threw the deed back onto the table. "This is entirely fake," he yelled, pointing a shaking, desperate finger at me. "He is lying. He printed this garbage off the internet to ruin my night. Look at him. He is wearing a cheap suit from a discount rack. He is a pathetic fraud trying to ruin Grandma's dinner." Actually, Aunt Vivian spoke up for the very first time. Her voice was incredibly calm and absolutely deadly, slicing through Sebastian's hysteria. She reached into her sensible leather purse and held up her smartphone. "It is a bespoke chiton suit, Sebastian. It costs significantly more than your leased car. And if you refuse to believe the legal deed, maybe you will believe the front page of the Wall Street Journal." She turned the phone around so the entire table could clearly see the screen. On it was the glowing article Grandma Beatrice had told me about. The bold, undeniable headline read, "The Invisible Billionaire. How Nathan Hale Built a FinTech Empire from a Brooklyn Basement. Net worth," Vivian read aloud, savoring every single syllable as she stared directly at my parents. "Estimated at over $250 million in highly liquid assets." Sebastian stared at the glowing screen. He looked at the phone, then he looked at me. His arrogant, perfectly curated face completely crumbled. It was not just shock. It was the absolute, catastrophic destruction of his entire worldview. He realized in that exact second that he was never the prince of this family. He was just the foolish jester dancing for borrowed coins. "You!" Sebastian pointed a shaking, pathetic finger at me. "You knew. You knew this whole time and you let us. You let me." "I let you what?" I asked, my voice devoid of any pity. "I let you brag? I let you insult me constantly?" "Yes, I did. Because I wanted to see if you were fundamentally capable of treating your own brother with basic human respect without knowing my bank account balance. You completely failed the test. You showed exactly who you are." "You selfish prick," Sebastian screamed, lunging across the table, knocking over a crystal wine glass. Deep red wine spilled across the pristine white linen like fresh blood. "You have all this money and you let Dad struggle? You let me worry about rent and my wedding? You could have paid off our debts. You could have given us the inheritance we deserve. You are a monster." "I asked for a loan exactly once in my entire life," I said, my voice cutting through his hysterical screaming like a blade. "I asked for $50,000 to save my company from bankruptcy. Dad told me he did not have the liquidity. He told me to figure it out on my own. The very next day, he bought you a Lamborghini." I turned my head and looked directly at my father. He looked gray. His skin was ashen, his hands were trembling, and he absolutely could not meet my eyes. "That was the defining moment, Dad," I said, making sure every single word landed perfectly. "That was the exact moment you made your choice. You chose the luxury car. You chose the fake image. You bought your favorite son an expensive toy, and you left me in the dark to die. Well, I did not die, Dad. I survived, and I won." "Nathan," my mother started to sob hysterically, reaching her trembling hand across the table toward me. "We didn't know. We had no idea you were suffering. If we had known you were doing so well." "That is exactly the problem, Mom," I said, pulling my hand away sharply so she could not touch me. "If you had known I was rich, you would have pretended to love me. You only love success. You only love money. You do not love me. You never have." Suddenly, Clara, Sebastian's fiancée, stood up. Her chair screeched backward. She was staring at Sebastian with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The illusion of her perfect Manhattan lifestyle was evaporating before her eyes. "You told me you were rich," she said to Sebastian, her voice shaking with intense anger. "You told me you were buying the penthouse. You told me you had a massive trust fund and a six-figure salary." "I will, Clara," Sebastian stammered, frantically grabbing her arm, his eyes wide with panic. Baby, please, he is lying. We can fix this. My dad has assets. We will figure it out. She aggressively shook his hand off her arm. You are a complete fraud, Sebastian. You have no job, your parents are totally broke, and you are going to drag me into this financial mess. I am facing a lawsuit from the venue if we don't pay the deposit tomorrow. I am completely done. She pulled off her massive diamond engagement ring, a ring I strongly suspected was financed on a high-interest credit card, and dropped it directly into Sebastian's spilled red wine. Plink. She grabbed her designer bag and walked straight out of the restaurant without looking back. Sebastian stared at the diamond ring sinking into the dark red liquid. He looked up at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. You ruined everything, he shrieked, tears finally spilling down his face, completely abandoning any pretense of dignity. Are you happy now? You ruined my entire life. I did not ruin your life, Sebastian, I said calmly, adjusting my tailored jacket. I just turned on the lights. If your life looks like a complete mess, that is because it always was. The private dining room at the Gilded Lily was completely silent save for the pathetic sound of my mother weeping into her expensive cloth napkin. Outside our door, other diners were trying to peer in, drawn by the shouting. A waiter holding a dessert tray stood frozen in the doorway, looking absolutely terrified, clearly wishing he could vanish into thin air. Grandma Beatrice slowly cleared her throat. The sound was quiet, but it commanded absolute respect from everyone in the room. Well, she said, her raspy voice cutting cleanly through the heavy, toxic tension. I believe I ordered the tiramisu, and since my grandson Nathan is paying the bill, and he can certainly afford it, I would like it boxed up to go. She stood up. She was shaky on her feet, requiring the table for balance, but she possessed an undeniable, towering dignity that made my parents shrink in their seats. Vivian, Nathan, let us leave. I think the air in this room has become entirely too toxic to breathe. Grandma, wait, Sebastian pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. He tried to move around the table toward her. You cannot leave with him. He has manipulated you. He planned this to hurt us. He is the only honest man sitting at this table, Grandma Beatrice snapped, her blue eyes narrowing at him with intense disappointment. Happy birthday to me. I walked over, gently offered Grandma my arm, and supported her weight. Aunt Vivian grabbed her purse and shot one final, completely disgusted look at her brother and sister-in-law. We walked out of the private dining room together, our heads held high, leaving my parents and Sebastian sitting completely paralyzed in the smoking wreckage of their own elaborate lies. Outside the restaurant, the Manhattan air was incredibly crisp and shockingly cold. My rental car with the dented bumper was parked down the street, but we were not taking it tonight. We are not taking the rental, I told Aunt Vivian. I arranged for a private car. A sleek, black SUV pulled up to the curb immediately. It was not a flashy limousine. It was just a clean, highly professional private car service driven by a man in a sharp suit. Take us to the Monarch, I instructed the driver quietly as I helped Grandma inside the warm vehicle. The Monarch? Aunt Vivian asked, her eyebrows raised in genuine surprise as she climbed in after us. We are going there right now? The penthouse is fully furnished, I said, buckling my seatbelt. I bought the luxury model unit. It is significantly better than any hotel in the city, and Grandma deserves the absolute best tonight. Later that night, we sat on the massive, sweeping terrace of Penthouse, overlooking the glittering, endless skyline of Manhattan. Central Park looked like a dark, peaceful ocean far below us. The city noise was reduced to a gentle hum. Grandma Beatrice sat in a plush, expensive armchair, wrapped securely in a thick cashmere blanket I had found in the master closet. It is quite a nice view, she said softly, looking out at the city lights. Substantially better than the view from your basement window. Much better, I agreed, sitting next to her and handing her a cup of hot chamomile tea. My phone blew up the entire night. I had exactly 30 missed calls from my mother, 20 frantic voicemails from my father begging to discuss a financial arrangement and avoid foreclosure, and a string of abusive, unhinged text messages from Sebastian ranging from severe physical threats to begging for a cash handout. I powered the phone off completely and placed it face down on the glass table. "So," Aunt Vivian said, sipping her tea and looking out at the skyline, "what exactly happens now, Nathan?" "Now," I said, leaning back and taking a deep breath of the cold air. "I hire a premium real estate lawyer. I pay off the massive second mortgage on Grandma's house so the bank does not foreclose on it. But the deed goes entirely into my name. Dad and Mom can continue to live there, but they answer strictly to me as their landlord." "And Sebastian?" Grandma asked, turning her head to look at me. "Sebastian is completely on his own," I said firmly. "For the very first time in his pampered life, he will have to earn his keep." Grandma Beatrice nodded slowly, a look of profound, beautiful peace settling over her tired features. "Good. Let him sink or swim on his own merits. You did well, my boy." The next morning, I woke up in a master bed that cost more than my entire college tuition. I walked out into the massive living room. The morning sun was pouring brightly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Grandma Beatrice was still sitting in the armchair on the terrace where I had left her. She looked incredibly peaceful, but she never woke up. She passed away quietly in her sleep that night, sitting in the exact penthouse she had encouraged me to buy, completely satisfied after finally seeing her invisible grandson step into the light and claim his rightful place in the world. Her funeral was held exactly 3 days later. It was undoubtedly the hardest, most agonizing day of my life, but it was also the most clarifying. The sky was overcast, a fitting gray for the somber occasion. My parents and Sebastian attended. They looked like absolute ghosts. All the arrogant swagger, the designer clothes, the loud, booming voices. It was all completely gone. Sebastian looked deeply disheveled. He had not shaved in days, his eyes were bloodshot, and his suit looked wrinkled. My dad looked like he had aged 10 years in a single week. They tried to approach me as we stood by the graveside, the cold wind whipping around us. "Nathan," my dad said, his voice trembling uncontrollably. He looked down at the wet grass, unable to meet my gaze. "About your mother's house. The bank called yesterday regarding the missed payments. They are threatening eviction." "I handled it," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "The mortgage is paid in full. The house is legally safe." "You're welcome." "Thank you," he choked out, wiping his eyes with a shaking hand. "And about us, about the family. Can we please sit down and talk about the future?" "Not today," I said coldly. "Today is strictly for Grandma Beatrice. Do not disrespect her memory by asking me for money right now." I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not offer them a ride back to the city. I got into my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the cemetery, forced to face the reality they had created. I needed time. I needed space to mourn the only person in the world who saw my value when I was completely in the dark. For an entire month following the funeral, I went completely no contact. I blocked Sebastian's number from my phone entirely. I routed all of my parents' desperate, tearful calls straight to a monitored voicemail. I focused entirely on Aegis Analytics, closing a massive new data acquisition deal that solidified our dominance in the market. I focused on properly furnishing the penthouse, making it a space that felt like home. Most importantly, I focused on healing my own mind and processing the immense grief of losing Grandma Beatrice. But I knew I could not ignore the situation forever. Legally, I owned the house they lived in, and despite everything they had done to me, I realized that I did not want to be a cruel person. I did not want to be vengeful. I just wanted absolute justice and ironclad boundaries. Eventually, I received a letter from Sebastian in the mail. It was not a quick text message or an angry, demanding email. It was a physical, handwritten letter on cheap lined paper. "Nathan," it read, "I am completely broke. Clara sued me for the non-refundable deposit on the wedding venue, and the lawyer fees are destroying me. Dad fired me from the company because he literally cannot afford to pay my salary anymore. I am sleeping on a friend's terrible couch in Queens. I know I was a massive jerk. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I need help. Real help. I don't want money. I just need to know how you did it. It was the first genuinely humble thing my brother had ever said in his entire life. The next day, my dad left a lengthy voicemail. "Nathan," he said, his voice sounding hollow and utterly defeated. "I am officially retiring. I am liquidating the construction supply business to pay off our remaining vendors and avoid a massive lawsuit. It is completely over. I just wanted you to know. And I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry for everything." I listened to that message 3 times. I realized that by finally winning the game, I had aggressively forced them to face actual reality. The toxic illusion was dead. They had hit absolute rock bottom, and the facade had shattered completely. I picked up my phone and called my father back. "Meet me at the diner," I instructed. "The greasy one in Brooklyn where I first met Victor." The diner had not changed at all. It still smelled heavily of burnt coffee and cheap bacon grease. My dad was sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked incredibly small. The bluster, the master of the universe persona he always wore, was entirely gone. He was just an old, tired man wearing a frayed polo shirt. I slid into the booth across from him. "You look exhausted, Dad," I said bluntly. "I am exhausted," he admitted, staring into his black coffee. "I have been exhausted for over 10 years, Nathan, constantly trying to keep up appearances. It is physically and mentally draining. The massive mortgage, the leased luxury cars, the country club memberships. We could not afford any of it, but I simply could not stop. I thought if we looked highly successful, eventually we would actually be successful." "That is not how the math works," I said gently but firmly. "I know that now," he sighed, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "You decisively proved that." He looked up at me. "Why didn't you just tell us? Why did you let us treat you like an absolute failure when you were building an empire?" "Because if I told you," I said, leaning forward, "you would not have been proud of the man I am. You would have been proud of the cash. And you would have instantly demanded that I give it to Sebastian to waste." My dad physically flinched. He opened his mouth to argue, then slowly closed it. He nodded his head. "You are completely right," he whispered. "God help me, you are right. I would have demanded the money. I failed you, son. I saw Sebastian as a reflection of who I desperately wanted to be. Charming, popular, loud. And I saw you as, I don't know, you were quiet. You were intense. You reminded me of the hard work I was trying to avoid. I was just working, Dad. I know, and I cannot undo the past. But I want you to know I am genuinely proud of you. You saved your grandmother's house. You did not have to do that." I took a deep breath, pulling a legal folder out of my briefcase. "Here is the new deal, Dad. I am having my lawyer set up a strict trust fund. It will pay the property taxes and the basic maintenance on the house. You and Mom will receive a modest monthly stipend. It will be exactly enough to live comfortably, buy groceries, and pay medical bills. But it will not be enough for leased Lamborghinis, country club dues, or designer bags. You are officially retired. You will live quietly. The blank checkbook is permanently closed. There is no massive inheritance coming." He looked at the documents, then back at me. "That is significantly more than fair, Nathan. Thank you. And Sebastian," I added, my voice hardening. "He gets absolutely nothing from this trust. Zero." My dad nodded in agreement. "He needs to learn." I met Sebastian exactly a week later. I did not invite him to the Penthouse. We met in a public park in Queens. He looked extremely rough. He had lost weight and he was wearing generic jeans and a plain t-shirt. There was no bespoke suit in sight. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, staring down at his scuffed sneakers. "You wrote that you wanted to know how I did it," I said, crossing my arms. "Yeah," he laughed bitterly. "I always thought you were just weird, locked away in that basement. I had no idea you were building a rocket ship. I wasn't building a rocket ship, I corrected him. I was building a life raft. Because I looked at the numbers and I knew this family's ship was going down. Sebastian looked up at me. I hated you, you know, growing up. You were so completely self-sufficient. You didn't need anyone's approval. I needed everyone to constantly like me. I needed mom to praise me. I needed dad to fund my life. I felt like a balloon. If they stopped blowing hot air into me, I would just shrivel up and die. And now I have popped. I have nothing. No fiancé, no career, no money, no status. Clara's lawyer is threatening me every day. You have yourself, I said simply. That is exactly what Grandma Beatrice tried to tell you. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. So, are you going to give me a job at your company? Make me a janitor to publicly humiliate me? No, I said flatly. I am not giving you a job. And I am absolutely not giving you a single dollar. Sebastian's shoulders slumped. Right? I figured. But, I said, reaching into my pocket and handing him a crumpled business card. I spoke to Victor. He knows a guy who runs a massive logistics and shipping company in New Jersey. It is an entry-level position on the loading docks. It is brutal, physical, hard work. But, if you show up on time, shut your mouth and actually work hard, you can earn a promotion. They pay a real salary with benefits. Sebastian took the card, staring at the address. Loading docks. It is honest work, Sebastian. You will rent a small, affordable apartment. You will pay your own utility bills. You will build your own actual value from the ground up. Just like Grandma's coins. He looked at the card for a very long time. Then he looked at me. Nathan, he said, his voice cracking. I am so deeply sorry for the comments about the rental car. For all of it. I know, I said. Good luck on the docks, Sebastian. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. It has been exactly 1 year since that explosive dinner at the Gilded Lily. Things are drastically different now. My family is not perfect, but they are finally real. My dad and mom are living quietly in Connecticut. My mom joined a local community gardening club, a cheap, simple hobby. She actually seems much happier and significantly less anxious now that she isn't trying to impress wealthy people who never cared about her. Sebastian took the logistics job on the docks. He hated it intensely for the first 3 months. He almost quit twice, but he forced himself to stay. He just got a promotion to shift supervisor last week. He drives a used Ford Focus that he pays for entirely by himself. We text occasionally. We are not best friends, but the toxic competition is gone. And me? I am still running Aegis Analytics. But I sold the Monarch Penthouse. It was too massive, too flashy. It felt like I only bought it to prove a point, not to actually build a home. I bought a beautiful historic brownstone in Brooklyn. It has a basement, but this time, the basement is a temperature-controlled wine cellar, and the door is always left wide open. I kept Grandma Beatrice's wooden box of coins. It sits directly on my office desk, right next to a framed picture of her. Sometimes, when the financial markets are highly volatile and the world feels incredibly loud, I open that old box. I pick up a tarnished mercury dime. I feel the heavy, cold weight of it in my palm. And I remember her exact words. Value is never about the superficial shine. It is about the unyielding substance beneath. It is about the quiet, relentless work you do in the dark when absolutely no one is watching and no one is cheering for you. My family finally sees me now, but more importantly, I finally see them. I see them as flawed, profoundly broken people who did the absolute best they could with their incredibly limited, superficial understanding of the world. I have forgiven them, not because they necessarily deserve my forgiveness, but because I deserve absolute peace. So, if you are out there right now, feeling completely invisible, feeling like the world is constantly celebrating the loud, the arrogant, and the shiny while you grind away in the dark shadows, keep going. Build your fortress. Save your coins. Write your code. Do the work. Your time will inevitably come, and when it finally does, you will not need to shout for attention. The absolute truth of your success will echo loud enough to shatter their illusions. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut off the people you love to protect your own peace and set real boundaries? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.